Registry Matters is an independent production. The opinions and ideas here are that of the host and do not reflect the opinions of any other organization. If you have problems with these thoughts, FYP.
Recording live from FYP Studios East and West. Transmitting across the internet, this is episode 193 of Registry Matters. Larry, good evening.
Well, good evening, Andy.
How are you? Do you know, today's a special day. First, how are you? Are you doing well today? Cranky, as usual?
I'm getting more cranky with every passing day.
I believe that. Here, let me pull up your picture. That's because you are this old.
Wow.
That is an old cat. Yeah. That's, I think, the first Secretary of War, Larry.
So that would have been my boss's mentor.
Yes, that could be right. Tell me something. Is today, we should do a quick little acknowledgement of a significant event that happened 20 years ago today.
Absolutely, we should. It's a terrible day that it's been all over the media, so everyone knows what we're talking about. 9/11, 2001, where thousands of Americans tragically died in the most horrible ways you could. I mean, you can't even imagine what they would have gone through in their final moments. Those who were trapped in the buildings, those who were trying to save those trapped in the buildings, and those who were in the airplanes having no idea what was happening until the last moment. It's a sad day, but we should never forget.
There were people jumping from buildings. Like, can you imagine being on the 50th floor and you're like, well, can't go down. And you just make that would just be an unbelievable decision that you'd have to go out and make of whether that would be your better alternative. So yeah, I want to definitely acknowledge that this is that day. Pretty significant, of course. But Larry, we have a very special program this evening. We are going to, we did this, I think episode 2 is where we spoke about polygraphs, and a woman from Florida Action Committee reached out to me, and Daphne set up a program about a month ago for us to do something of a deep dive into polygraphs. And I know that you're an expert on polygraphs, right?
Right.
So Daphne is joining us, and we have a whole bunch of people. This is being done over a Zoom call. If you didn't get the Zoom information, then I don't know what to tell you, because I pushed it out and announced it that everyone could join. And so here we are. Daphne, welcome. How are you?
I am doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for setting this up and coordinating with your peoples. We're very big fans of saying your people here, or you people in this program, as you may have figured out from listening to you only started listening halfway recently ago.
I actually started listening probably about 6 months ago, and I started with episode 1, and then I realized that it's going to take me forever. So I think I got to episode 60, and then I jumped ahead to June of this year.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. There you go, Larry. See, people are looking for the back catalog.
Well, I could only imagine what she would say comparing those early episodes when we didn't know what we were doing and we didn't sound very good compared to today. Our technology has changed. So comparing episode 3 with episode 193 would be quite a difference.
Definitely. So Daphne, what is our plan tonight? Who are you and why are you here? Why are we here talking about polygraph?
Okay. Well, I just work with a lot of people who are required to register. And like many people that don't really know about what's going on with the registry, they think everything is black and white. They believe everything that they have ever been told. So that's all that they know. One of the things that I realized that I did not know a whole lot about was polygraphs. I didn't realize that registrants actually were required to take a polygraph, and I don't know much about them. As I got to talking more with the registrants, I realized that seems like there's a lot of deception going on in these polygraphs. So yeah, so I was kind of hoping that maybe you and Larry could help us figure out what to say and do and what we shouldn't say and do.
I think that actually, Larry, would be an incredibly good segue into getting into your opening thoughts on what, who, where, why, what a polygraph is from the point of view of where you are of working for attorneys for all of eternity and all that.
So my opinion of polygraphs, is that what you're asking?
Like opening thoughts on what the why does supervision use it? Is it what's the whole point? You've actually used them in practice before, if I'm not mistaken, and I think that you may have had somewhat of an evolution of your opinion of their effectiveness.
I have indeed. We've used them in the practice. We don't do criminal defense where I'm employed any longer, but we use them in practice. It's a lot easier emotionally if you do a guilty plea on someone who actually did what they're being accused of having done. There were cases where the person would come to us and say that they hadn't done it, and many attorneys feel it's important for you to know what your client did do. And therefore, sometimes we would say, well, we'd like you to take a polygraph. Would you agree to that as a condition of representation? And they could have easily said, no, we'd rather have another attorney, but we would do that. And when the person would show deception on the polygraph, oftentimes either in the post-test interview or with us, they would admit that, yeah, I did it. And we had occasionally inconclusive results where the polygrapher would say, I don't really know. I can't give an opinion. But based on that experience, I was fairly comfortable with using the polygraph because people admitted that the machine was right. Then I talked to a long-term examiner, and he said it's no more accurate than the flip of a coin. And being a mathematical genius that you are, you could tell us what the odds of a coin flip would be, right?
Yeah, it would just be 50-50.
And if we're talking about something that's no more accurate than 50-50, that's a whole different analysis than something that I thought was accurate 80 to 90% of the time. But the reason they're used in treatment is because the heightened sensitivity of those who are on this type of supervision. I can't think of a supervision that's more intense and more heightened in terms of community concern. So the profession, in conjunction, that being the polygraph profession, in conjunction with the treatment providers, have collaborated. I don't want to say colluded, but it may be a more accurate description, but they've collaborated in convincing the powers that be that this is the best way to monitor compliance with supervision. So therefore, they are routinely used to monitor compliance with supervision as well as sexual history, which is quite common. The first polygraph you're going to get is a sexual history polygraph on your questionnaire that they're going to give you.
Do you want to dig into that real quick? What is the difference between a sexual history polygraph and a supervision compliance? I didn't catch exactly how you worded that.
Well, when you begin your supervision, it's a very dangerous polygraph they do in the very beginning. They'll ask you all of your sexual history because they are trying to devise a unique treatment, individualized treatment plan for you, which is not what they're trying to do. But that's what they presented as, trying to find out how to best treat you. So they need to know what type of sexual inclinations you have. But the dangerous part of it is that you could admit to something that is prosecutable. And very few states provide an immunity for those admissions. So therefore, those admissions could lead to a prosecution. So they'll do a sexual history questionnaire, and then they'll polygraph on that questionnaire. And then as supervision unfolds, they'll do periodic maintenance polygraph. And it's supposed to be driven by your conditions of supervision. So all those questions are going to be more about supervision compliance. The sexual history is going to be about your questionnaire that you filled out, which are very intrusive. Some of the questions are just so over the top about sex with animals and sex with dead people, arson. How many times have you committed arson and came in, and what type of satisfaction did you get by watching the building burn? I wonder how many people actually say that they burned a building and got sexual stimulus from watching the building burn.
Yeah, I'm sure there's like a statistically significant number of people that have done that. Would you say that the sexual history is like, I would say that they're both witch hunts, but would you say one of them is more of a witch hunt than the other one, like the sexual history being more of a witch hunt?
I don't know how you would quantify that because they're both dangerous. The sexual history, if you admit things that you've done that are unlawful, could bring you a prosecution for a new crime. The maintenance polygraph could bring you a revocation proceeding, assuming your only violation was technical in nature. If you were to admit to a new crime, of course, that would be within a zone of prosecution. But let's assume that all of our people are complying with the terms of their supervision and not committing new crimes, and they're doing technical violations such as breaking curfew or being around minors or whatever the case may be. That would be a technical violation, but would not rise to the level of new prosecution. They're both very dangerous polygraphs.
As we learned from a personal experience, that just very vague general background. A friend of mine here in town, he was released, and he goes to do his first post-prison polygraph. And I don't know a question they asked. I don't know why, whatever like showed up as deception, whatever you want to call it. Then they come and actually go search the house. And in searching the house, they found things that they had problems with, and they locked him up. But they wouldn't necessarily have come by and checked on him, but maybe they would have, and maybe they would have found the things. But I think what triggered them to come in is that some little meters on the kabuki machine went off, and that's what prompted them to come in.
On the what machine?
The kabuki, Kabuki, kabuki means garbage. So I will now give my opening thoughts on what a polygraph is. First of all, it's complete garbage, junk, bullshit. But from your point of view, what you like, if they get you to confess to something, then you've confessed to it. Or in the case of like my friend, if they bring you in, if they bring you in for the polygraph, and that makes them think that you're hiding something, and they come search you and they find something on your phone, in your house, whatever, then I guess the thing worked, except for all it did was scare you into thinking that it does work. But 100%, it is not a factual machine that does anything. So what I did, Larry, is I did a whole bunch of research and put down a bunch of information that I am somewhat inclined to read or not as far as what it does. But I'm not going to go over the history, but it's colloquially called a lie detector test, but it does not detect lies. They put miscellaneous things on you. They'll put like you go to the doctor now and they put the little gizmo on your finger and they're going to check your oxygen saturation. So they're going to check for that. They're going to put a strap around your chest to check your breathing. They're going to check what your pulse is. And I've even seen, I think in movies, so I'm not sure if this one is real, but they're even going to check for pupil dilation or like fidgety eyeballs. And they're looking for all these things that when they ask you the question of, did you do naughty XYZ thing? Then I'll put this up on the screen for people to see. They see meters and graphs and things that look like someone's going into cardiac arrest. And they're looking for some kind of indicator to tell them that you are not being truthful in some form or fashion. But I was thinking about this earlier, Larry, and something that may, and forgive me, I hope this is not an untasteful way to put this. I bet you if you put someone on the kabuki machine and you played video of the planes crashing in the towers, you would show some kind of response. Does that mean you're being deceived? No, it just means you're showing a response. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that the kabuki machine only shows that you have a response to something either said or something that you've seen. Excuse me. And so for now, that'll be the end of my opening on the kabuki machine. Davney, where do you want to go from here?
Okay, well, I was just wondering, you had mentioned that they actually show you the lines of the electrodes or whatever.
I don't think they're, no, they're not going to show. I'm pretty sure that the examiner is sitting in a place they're doing it on computers now. They used to do it where, I'm sure we've all seen it in television shows and movies, where there's like this big wheel of tape and there are the little needles going back and forth, looking like a thing that would detect for earthquakes. Maybe that give people a reference point.
Okay.
But no, the examiner, like, I don't even like using these terms because these guys are a complete fraud. And so they're just looking at a computer screen, and that's what I had up on the screen was, this is what a computer screen, whatever the software would look like, is showing.
Okay. Well, who is the one who actually tells you that you need to have it done? Is it the therapist? Is it the PO? Is it the court?
I think Larry will agree that it could be either one of your people on your supervision handler people, or it could be your treatment provider.
Daphne, that would be correct. Like in our state, it would be a condition of those convicted of sexual offense. It would be a condition of their probation or parole that they would agree to take these examinations. And the examination could be triggered by the treatment provider, or it could be triggered by the probation officer. The probation officer can have suspicions and suggest that we need an examination. So the team containment model of supervision, which many jurisdictions use now, it could be any member of the team as far as wanting the polygraph done. It could even be in the team containment model, they use law enforcement. So your registry officials may be working in the team containment model with the treatment team, with the supervision authorities. So you could have the sheriff or whoever does the registration in that jurisdiction saying, we want to polygraph this person. And so it could be any of the above.
Okay, so if, say, it's your PO that said that you needed to have this polygraph done, and say your therapist said what was the results, or vice versa, do you have to tell them? Can you just say, that's between me and the polygraph person, that's between me and the PO, that's between me and my therapist? Do you have to say, do you have to disclose?
So in my experience with treatment, you signed away your HIPAA protections, whatever, so that your treatment provider is going to be sharing any information that they have with your handlers.
Okay.
That's a good answer, Andy. What happens is, in the team containment model, they would have you sign. The polygrapher won't even administer the test, because in many cases the person is not paying for it. In some cases they are, and I can't give you a breakdown on statistics, but in some states the jurisdiction pays for the examination. But the examiner will not do the examination until the release has been signed. So the authorities are going to see your probation, and your treatment is going to see what the examiner says. So you don't get to go do the report. The report is provided and discussed with the team.
And I wanted to back up to one piece. You, Daphne, you brought up judges. Again, Larry, confirm, I don't think judges have any sort of like daily, weekly, monthly dealings with you. Once they hit the stamp, the gavel down on the counter there, that they on their podium, that they don't ever they're not going to talk to you anymore. So you're just dealing with the law enforcement side, and you're dealing with your treatment provider.
That would be correct. The judge is never going to hear from you, barring a violation. And the judge is hoping that he or she never does hear from you again, because they don't want you to come back. And if you do come back, usually it's not a pleasant experience, but generally the judges are not involved in that.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see. One of the things that I found in the research was that when they were first invented back in the early 1900s, is that they were heralded as this like amazing medical device that was going to revolutionize all kinds of bits of science of being able to test for these responses. But again, you may, if it's testing, it's called galvanic response. It is testing for moisture on your finger, for one thing. So it's detecting whether you're sweating. And these are very minute things. But like the air conditioner could come on maybe in the room, and it changes, like it gives you chills almost. And it could then register some kind of bit on the machine. I'm really very much focused in my life about evidence and proof and logic and all that. And one of the things about science is something called a double-blind study. And a double-blind study is where the examiner that's administering a test does not know how the test is being run. That means when you're walking through the shopping mall, which nobody does anymore, but they would hand you 2 cups and they would say, hey, which one do you like more? Do you like this soda or this soda? The person that is giving you the test has no idea what's in each bottle. They are unaware, therefore they can't influence you. If we move this over to the polygraph, You could have a really like a hard ass kind of polygrapher that intimidates you and makes you nervous, or you could have like a friendly go lucky one, and this will change the results. It is not something that you or me, Daphne, could go administer to someone, quote unquote, reliably, because we're not trained in the field. Whereas anybody should be able to put the kabuki machine on them and ask them the questions, and if it were reliable, it would answer the questions.
Good point.
So this is one of the biggest things in my opinion that the registry treats us so crappily on is this, that they will use junk science that could potentially put you back in prison or in jail at least. And if they're going to go, Larry loves to say, put you in a cage, we should use something with a higher standard of evidence that is provable. But then to channel Larry again, and Larry, please, you get to say these things. But if it makes you confess, then didn't it work, right?
Well, that has been my question. If people at the end of the examination, if the examiner says, I see some areas of concern here, and we're adults here and we can have a conversation. Okay, so here's my question. You have shown, I ask you specifically as a what I call a relevant question, had you violated your curfew? And I see a response that concerns me. Do you want to talk about that? And the person rolls their eyes and they get a sheepish grin and they say, well, yeah, I have gone out after curfew. Well, okay, tell me a little bit about it. How many times have you gone out after curfew? Well, I kind of do it pretty regularly. Okay. At that point, the polygraph did work, didn't it?
It would definitely appear to have worked at that point. Just like the story with my friend here in town. He showed something on there, and then they come in 6 or 8 deep, whatever, with guns drawn, like he's Jeffrey Dahmer or something, and go haul him in. It's so bizarre to me what they do, that this particular device is used. It would be like going to a fortune teller, and the fortune teller says, I think that you're going to go commit some kind of crime. And law enforcement is then called, and they show up on your doorstep and arrest you because the fortune teller said you're going to do it. It's infuriating to me, Larry.
I understand, but from a practical perspective, if you're trying to detect, let's just play from the side of the system. The community wants us to keep, and I'm pretending I'm them, the community wants us to keep a very close eye on compliance for these people. And if we use this kabuki machine, as you call it, and people admit that they have not been in compliance, isn't that a net plus for community safety?
Yeah, if we make the assumption that you are out to go abduct every child on every corner, then I suppose so. Daphne, how about now? Do you have any other direction that you want to go before we dig into some other pieces of this whole puzzle?
Well, we have a question. Is a person in a court-ordered therapy who passed the polygraph required to take a second polygraph in order to confirm the first?
What do you think about that? I think that's more towards you, Larry.
I'm not aware of confirming the first, but polygraphs will be routine throughout the probation supervision. Likely the beginning would be the sexual history, but then compliance polygraphs. So if you have a 5 or 10 year term of supervision, theoretically you could do wonderful for the first year and a half, and you could become buddies with your PO, and you could think things are going really well and they're not watching you, and you could slip in your compliance. So therefore, if they never did a subsequent compliance polygraph, if you pass one compliance polygraph, then that would diminish the value of the kabuki machine, right?
It sounds like that would be the case, yes.
So therefore, you're likely to get polygraphs routinely, periodically. Maybe it's every 90 days, maybe it's every 6 months, but you're not going to. I'm not aware of one specifically to verify the first one, unless it shows inconclusive. But you're going to be polygraphed again and again and again.
But let's think about this. If you were to get a report from your doctor, heaven forbid, that you have cancer, you'd be like, I think I should go get a second opinion. But in this case, the opinion is garbage to begin with. And the second polygrapher is just as much of a bunk doctor as the first one that you went and saw. And I don't mean doctor in that regard, but the practitioner, so to speak. Larry, can you, I know that this is going to be a question on everyone's mind. Can they lock you up for failing a polygraph?
I hear it over and over again. I have not seen any proof to my satisfaction that it happens for just merely failing the polygraph, showing deception. It's usually followed by a post-test interview of some sort of admission. Or it has been, I have heard of people being terminated from their treatment because the treatment provider says clearly you're not trying to progress in treatment because you continue to fail the polygraph. This is your third one, so therefore we're terminating your treatment. Treatment being your supervision, community supervision being conditioned, one of them that you have this test done and that you have this treatment. If you're not in the treatment and having these tests done, I have heard of people being put in jail for that. But as far as just for failing the polygraph, I have not seen the evidence to my satisfaction that there's no petition ever been shown to me where it said the basis for the revocation is they simply showed deception on a polygraph.
I will. I'm pretty much in agreement. We almost have decided to put out some sort of bounty that we would pay some fee if anybody can show us that the Kabuki machine said they lied and they came in and put them in cuffs and walked them away. But instead, we know stories of someone that admitted to, after the polygraph, they showed deception, that they were not following their rules. And I'm doing all kinds of quotes on the camera. That they had, I think they said they shared a margarita with their wife on their anniversary. And that was a violation of their probation. And he admitted to it after the polygraph said, "You're lying." And they sent him into jail for a year.
That I'm quite familiar with.
Do you want to like publicly claim that Registry Matters would give out a prize of like $100 if you can show us some documentation that says that you got locked up for failing a poly?
I'm okay with that, but we have to be very clear. I need you to provide me the petition for the revocation action, and it cannot be followed with any admissions. It has to be merely the state of whichever jurisdiction it is seeking revocation of supervision, and then they have to put the reason, because for your defense, you have to know what the violation is. Show deception on polygraph, end of petition. If you could show me one of those, that's what we're looking for, that it stops at that point, nothing else.
I'm gonna throw this in there because it's along the same lines. Will in the chat says the PO can impose administrative sanctions for failing a polygraph. Say you're in a state that says no social media, and you failed. I don't like saying that. You showed some sort of signal when they asked you the question about social media, and on illicit use of social media, your internet access can be revoked or scrutinized more heavily, something along those lines. Does that sound about right, Larry?
So far, so good, but I think that's not really the question, as I understood it, right?
I was just tagging on that so if you show deception, supposedly that you already have a restriction that says you can't use social media, and whether you did or didn't, the polygraph says that you did. Now probation can turn around and come back and put the screws on you and your internet usage.
Now I've heard of that as far as they step up supervision. Since they believe in these devices, they will enhance your supervision, which is what happened to your friend. If they are in belief that you're not complying, the last thing they want is the cameras from the local news to come in and say, "Why didn't you detect that this guy?" What was the one that had the captive woman for years and years and years in California, and law enforcement never knew that she was there?
I want to say the guy's name was Carlos. The last name is a very common Hispanic kind of name, and I'm drawing a blank. And I don't even think that the guy was, but he had like a Lopez kind of name. And I'm not trying to be racist. That's just what I remember as the guy's name was something like that. I can't think of the name offhand.
So if you're in charge of 40 PFRs and you've got your treatment evaluation showing that there's concerns, you're going to increase supervision. If you have been told that you showed deception, they are going to increase your supervision, which they can do. Will is correct about that. But as far as taking you into custody, that is a whole different question. But can they say, well, we're going to come over and take a look at your computer? Can I see your phone? They're going to do all those things likely.
I'm with you. But so when they ask you these questions and all the little meters and gauges start going haywire and they say, you did the thing, and you go, but I didn't do it. Do you have any suggestions for people? And this is Uncle Larry talking. This is not legal advice. This is Uncle Larry. What would you tell somebody if the kabuki machine says that you're lying? What should you do in response?
Well, being that I do work in criminal defense, and our job is to try to shield people from mistakes they would make that would come back to haunt them, we would tell you the same thing if the cops show up with a search warrant and they surround you and they start asking you questions. We would say the same thing. Make no admissions. At the most, provide them identification because they do have the right to identify you. But as far as at the end of the examination, we would tell you, I think any competent legal advice would tell you that regardless of how much they lean on you and if they tell you you failed miserably and that you might as well just come clean, you'll feel a whole lot better and the truth will set you free and all that kind of stuff. The truth is not going to set you free. The truth will lock you up is what it will do. And I know that they don't mean that literally, that'll set you free. But I get a chuckle at that because people just have to get things off their chest. And if you get it off your chest, it's going to result in looking out from behind the bars.
You're going to have bars on your chest and not the lie on your chest, so to speak.
But we are not encouraging anyone to lie. But that's different than making admissions after you have told. We're assuming everyone answers these questions truthfully. And once you've completed a truthful polygraph, there's no reason for you to go any further in making admissions. And we would encourage everyone at the end, say, I don't know why the machine is showing deception, because I have told you the truth. You have told them the truth, right?
I got to think that if they asked you a question that triggered you, that when they then scrutinize you harder, that your heart and all of your metrics are going to be skyrocketing at that point, that you are now nervous that you're going to get locked up and so forth, even if you didn't do anything. You're going to have some sort of like what would be like if you have a really good poker face and no amount of pressure phases you, like this would be that kind of situation where, nah, I didn't do it. But God, they're gonna put pressure on you, aren't they? They're gonna like really, really pressure you.
They are. They're going to do good cop, bad cop. The polygrapher is going to try being your friend. He's going to do he or she. I try to avoid the gender terms, but the polygrapher is going to try to get you to admit that the machine is correct. And as I've said, I'm not encouraging you to lie, but you have told the truth and you need to stick with your story. I don't know why the machine is showing that. You would have to investigate your machine. Has it been checked lately for accuracy? I can't tell you why the machine is showing that because all I can do is tell you the truth.
Are you a first-time listener of Registry Matters? Well, then make us a part of your daily routine and subscribe today. Just search for Registry Matters through your favorite podcast app. Hit the subscribe button and you're off to the races. You can now enjoy hours of sarcasm and snark from Andy and Larry on a weekly basis. Oh, and there's some excellent information thrown in there too. Subscribing also encourages others of you people to get on the bandwagon and become regular Registry Matters listeners. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to Registry Matters right now. Help us keep fighting and continue to say FYP.
How about that? I think this is an incredibly good question. Tammy says, so the polygraph machine is a feel-good machine for lawyers or courts. Can the results be submitted as evidence in a criminal defense trial?
As a general rule, no. There's one state in the country, and it's in the western United States named New Mexico, where there are rules that permit limited admissibility for polygraph results in criminal proceedings. But as a general rule, they're not reliable enough and they're not admissible.
But this is the method of supervision. This is the they're using this to, I know that we're not putting people back through a whole court with that standard of evidence and all that, but they're still potentially going to put you back in a box in a cage somewhere. But they're using the kabuki machine to do this.
But the kabuki machine, the polygraph doesn't come into the revocation. What comes in the revocation is your admissions. They might casually mention that the revocation started after you showed deception and then you made subsequent admissions. That's what will happen in the revocation. But the graphs and charts and the examiner won't be called. They will focus on your confession.
I gotcha. And what's funny is one of our newer listeners, I believe it is, his name Peter, he said, and Larry said in a prior podcast, I don't know how your machine works. However, what I said is true. I don't remember when you said that, but that sounds roughly like what you've said. Larry.
I've said something to that effect. I can't explain it. I really know so little about this machine that what you've discussed already exceeds my knowledge. All I know is that we had people take them and they worked most of the time. And I had confidence that it was a reliable device. It was only until an off-the-record conversation with an examiner that had been doing exams for so many years, and he told me, I just can't have faith in this. And I said, well, have you been willing to say that publicly? He said, no, I make my living doing this. He said, but I said, well, what's the accuracy? And he said, really, the flip of a coin toss is the accuracy of the polygraph. And I said, well, that's good information to have. I don't know that we would have spent thousands of dollars sending people if we'd have known this, but that's what we did, and it worked.
Yep. And you may recall that leading up to that episode, you and I were on somewhat of, we almost got into a fight over it. Do you remember that? It got kind of heated.
I do remember that you had you had strong opinions, and I insisted that it worked. And I still insist that it works, but it works for different reasons. It works because people confess. But that works with good cop, bad cop. There are people where the team of detectives can get people to confess. And by telling them untrue things, manipulating their emotions, wearing them down physically with extremely long interrogations, there's various ways that people are tricked into confessions. They'll tell them things are not true. They're allowed to do that.
How about let's move over to this kind of question, Larry. A friend of mine had this situation happen. If you are unable to take one, either, let's say, if you refuse to take one or you are unable to financially, what would you suspect the next set of actions would be?
Well, when you say unable to take one, what would be an example of being unable? Like not being physically. There are some people, physical conditions, health conditions would not allow them to be a test subject. Is that what you're meaning?
I did run into somebody like that, so we could go down that route. But a friend of mine, it was like right around Christmas, and the treatment provider, which was really, really like not a great person. This was someone that was in the program, would seem to make the $40 or $50 a week for being in treatment. And my friend was unable to do it at the time. It was right around Christmas. He was working like $8 an hour, hauling sheet metal around a warehouse. And he had just bought Christmas presents for his kids. And they say, hey, you got to pony up your $225, $250 for the polygraph. And he goes, I don't have the money. So what do you think the treatment provider would say then?
Well, I would like to think that they would provide an opportunity for the funds to be raised. Of course, ideally, it would be paid for by the system, but I know that that's too much to ask because it's hard to convince the working taxpayers that they want to pay for testing for monitoring PFRs. But in our state, I know that people do get funding from the system, or at least they did get funding for. But in a case where he didn't have the money, it almost would be like a debtor's prison if they were able to revoke him and put him in custody for not having the money. That's really tragic, and I don't know what the answer would be other than a legal challenge. And of course, if he didn't have the money to pay for the polygraph, what would be the odds he would have the money for a legal challenge?
What he ended up doing is his probation officer gave him a month-long, hey, you can skip December, come back in January, and he went and title pawned his car to come up with the money for the poly.
And then did he pass it?
Which is really terrible.
Did he pass it with flying colors?
I think he was not required to take one again for another 6 months or a year, whatever they were requiring for this particular individual. But I did run into somebody that had very, very serious memory issues, and they wouldn't. So he wasn't going to do a sexual history one. So they were going to do the plethysmograph. I hope I've pronounced this word right. And are you familiar with this device?
I am. I've never had one administered, nor have I ever sent one but I've heard them describe it. I think they put a sensor around the circumference of one's organ, and they measure
Yes.
its reaction.
And so if you want to think of it similar to a blood pressure cuff, because I think the word is the same, because what it's doing is they're going to then inflate it, whatever, and they're going to put pressure on it. They're going to detect some kind of response, and then they're going to potentially show you arousing images. I'm trying to keep this like friendly and kosher and all that stuff. I gotta think, Larry, that even if you showed some kind of arousal to something, that doesn't mean you're guilty of something.
I would tend to agree with that, but what it would do, for better or worse, is it would help them determine what your interests are. And if you have healthy interests, that would be one level of supervision. And if you have unhealthy interests, that would be another level of supervision. I mean, we can't lock you up before you act, but if the arousal is coming for people who are prepubescent versus age appropriate, that would be, I mean, wouldn't you admit that would be a cause for concern?
Potentially, sure, but I bet you many, many, many people fantasize about doing something heinous, arson, whatever, and that's the end of it. But my understanding of how the brain works is just imagining it. Your brain is going through the process of doing it, whether you act it out physically or not. Your brain has actually gone through and kind of like, quote unquote, done it. It believes that it's a real thing just because you imagined it. So even though you imagine doing naughty things with naughty other entities, doesn't mean that that's something that you would go act on.
That is correct. The fact that you find something, that you are reacting to something, doesn't mean you're going to do it. But it doesn't mean you're not going to do it either. And while you're in the care of the handlers, and their job is the team containment model is designed to do exactly that, to contain any future offending. So that would be something that they would look at as a need to address if you reacted inappropriate to the stimuli.
How about control questions, Larry? Do they, at least on television, you see them, please state your name, or sorry, is your name such and such? They're only going to ask you things that are affirmative or a negative kind of question. So, are you a male? Well, God, that's probably not a great question at this point to ask somebody. But we could say, is your name Larry? And you would go yes or no, and then we would have some kind of baseline for the machine. Someone had asked, what would be how to identify a control question versus a relevant question? In my mind, Larry, I'm thinking that something that is a relevant question would be something specifically asking, have you used alcohol since your last probation, like your last polygraph, or they ask some really disgusting questions, Larry. They really do. These are things that I don't even want to like articulate. Where have you self-pleasured yourself in the last whatever? Like, they will ask you these kinds of questions.
Well, it's easy to determine them because a properly done polygraph, the relevant questions will be constructed in the pre-test interview. You will know what the relevant questions are because they don't just hook you up to a machine and start a barrage of questions. You're going to get 3 relevant questions in all likelihood, and that's about it. And they're going to tell you what those questions are, and you can actually have a discussion about the questions because I think I've given examples before, but the relevant question is intended to get at the basis, the reason for the test. If it's missing merchandise in a retail store or whatever the purpose of the test is, but they're going to, if you were running a retail place, and we used to term the consumption that people do that work in a convenience store as grazing. So we pretty much know that almost everyone who works in retail does a little bit of grazing. If they have open containers, if they have deli, if they have French fries, and if they have things that they can pick up, finger food, they're going to do that. They're going to drink beer. We know that. So we know that you've taken company property. We know that. So we're gonna construct the relevant question to take that into account. So we're going to ask you before the test that in terms of what you have consumed that didn't belong to you, you drink beverages, right? Have you eaten any hot items off of the plate or whatever? And then when you make those disclosures, then we're going to take the relevant question and build it around that. And the relevant question is going to be, other than the items that have been previously discussed, have you taken anything of value from this company? And that's where you're going to trip up, because all of a sudden you're going to have a flashback. You're a smoker and you're running short on money, and you just couldn't help yourself because of your addiction, and you took some company cigarettes. You said nobody's looking, and you took a pack of cigarettes, and you're going to have that reaction to the relevant question. But they're not going to just hook you up to a polygraph and start spewing out questions. It doesn't work that way, folks.
Deputy HMFIC, you may know who that one is, Larry, says, they asked if I looked at CP, which I declined to answer because they technically can't directly ask if you've broken the law. I have them reframe the question as if I have looked at pornography. Can you speak to anything along those lines about them asking you directly if you've committed an actual crime?
I mean, he's brilliant because he shielded himself to some degree by getting them to rephrase the question. CP would be an admission of criminality, as he said. But yes, you can do that. Now, exactly what you're trying to avoid is going to happen anyway, because when you admit that you have looked, assuming that he answered yes, because obviously that was the reason for rephrasing the question, was to get the yes to narrow the prosecutable option. But the same result's going to befall him, because they're going to say, well, since he's looking at porn, we need to figure out what kind of porn he's looking at. So they're going to enhance supervision. They're going to be looking at your devices. You're going to be under the microscope if you admit that you've looked at any porn. But at least he didn't hand his head to them on a platter by admitting he looked at prosecute, because then you've admitted to criminal conduct.
He also said they also then asked if he's used illegal drugs as well, declined to answer. And can we talk about that format? Actually, I want to ask you two questions, and then Daphne, I see that you're posting a bunch of questions. First of all, while you're on supervision, they can ask you a question. I just lost my train of thought. Is there a difference? I'll go this direction first. Can they ask you? Can you be forced to take polygraphs while you're just simply on the registry? Are you familiar with anybody that has to do that?
With limited exceptions, no. The registry statutes are, as much as people want to pretend it's the same as probation, it isn't. It doesn't have the same restrictions of probation. It's tough. I'm not minimizing the registry. The registry is awful, and it should be mostly abolished. But you wouldn't have to take a polygraph simply being registered, except in situations. There are states that have civil commitment, and they have people who are in the community in civil commitment rather than being in lockup. And as a part of their treatment while they're civilly committed, they would be taking those tests. So if Pennsylvania, for example, if you're an SVP as a condition, you could. But as a general rule, and very limited exceptions, you're not going to be taking a polygraph as a condition of your registration.
And I bet you a lot of people have so basically the only people that are going to take polygraphs are people that are on supervision. And that would be even someone that is on CSL, community supervision for life. They're going to take polys from the time that they're released from prison until the time that they're put in a box.
It would be potentially that. Some states are going to lose interest. I think New Jersey, I can't affirm that for sure because I've never lived there, but New Jersey, after a period of time, when you finish your probation and you go on your CSL, they're not as strict. But if you transfer that CSL to, for example, from New Jersey to New Mexico, they will forget all of what you achieved in New Jersey, and they will treat you as a brand new offender here, and you will be taking those polygraphs again, even though New Jersey may have said you're done with them. So you very well could be taking them for the remainder of your days because you're under a form of supervision, but let's hope not.
Okay. Daphne, you're throwing tons of questions up there in chat. You want to throw some out here?
Sure.
I love the one that you posted about make and model.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so you had mentioned that sometimes, if it's stating that you are not telling the truth about something, that, you should stick with your guns, and, maybe your equipment is faulty. So should we ask if, does the equipment get faulty with age? Should we ask for the model and year of the equipment?
God, I think that's an amazing question, Larry.
It real-
I think that is so funny. That throws all back on the polygrapher person.
It is a brilliant question. I would shy away from asking that. They're going to consider that. They're going to consider that confrontational. They're going to consider that non-compliant, and they're not going to be amused. But it is a great question. I would be more neutral and say, well, yeah, I'm not able to explain the workings of that machine. All I can do is tell you the truth to the questions, and that's what I've done. Is it possible? I mean, if you could say it very politely without any snark or any sarcasm, if you could say, well, is there anything that the machine, I mean, it has to be something related to the machine because I'm telling the truth, and leave it at that. But I wouldn't get into a jousting match with them about their equipment.
What else did you have for questions, Daphne?
Well, I saw Elena said, what about people with Tourette syndrome, tics, other neurological disorders, that they have problems passing polygraphs? Is there any remedy for them regarding polygraphs as part of their supervision?
I bet you they're just they'll accept that you can't take one, and then they're gonna like come visit your house every 4 days.
Okay. What about somebody
Larry?
with a pacemaker, or the doctor advises them that it's probably, maybe they have like some kind of medical reason that they can't do it?
I can't. The way that I understand the whole thing, I can't imagine it interfering with a pacemaker other than the stress of it. So as I understand pacemakers, they kind of keep your heart in a very limited range of activity. Like it can't respond to a high pressure situation where it needs to start bouncing really fast, pumping really fast. So if you get put under a high pressure situation and you need more blood, but the pacemaker is going to keep you in a fairly steady rhythm, I'm pretty sure that this is going to be not very good for you.
Okay.
Well, my understanding.
Larry, you have a pacemaker now. You're old enough, aren't you?
Well, I've had a pacemaker for going on 40 years now. So, but my understanding is that they're supposed to go through the polygrapher is supposed to go through a sort of a medical questionnaire, and you're supposed to have that discussion if you have issues. And I remember one time when a client was deemed not suitable for being examined by the device, by the kabuki machine, as you call it. But I don't know all the nuances of who would not be medically suitable, but I would encourage research on that, because there are people who are not suitable because of medical conditions to take the exam.
What else do you have, Dave?
So results are analyzed by the examiner. Is that correct?
I believe that's
Okay.
correct. Yes, Larry?
Yes. The polygrapher is going to look at the scoring, do the scoring. And as Andy showed the graphs, they don't use those anymore. That's very, very old technology. But the same thing happens. It's just done. It's done digitally now. But they go through it and analyze and do the scoring.
If something comes back stating that you are being deceptive, could you ask for the second opinion? And what if you do get the two different responses from the same test from different examiners?
That is a really great question. I don't know what they would do if you wanted a second opinion, because no one has ever done that to my knowledge. But that would be, we did it once in the law office, and we got a very similar result, so we didn't have the conflict. But if what I think the experience is that you actually asked for the results to be analyzed. You asked for another polygrapher to give the opinion based on the questions and the graph, as I understand it. I think that's what they do. But if you have all the money in the world, I don't know what would stop you. I mean, would you need your probation officer's permission to go take a polygraph of your choosing with an examiner that you've chosen using the exact same questions, assuming you could get those questions because they need to be the exact same questions. But could you do that? I don't know what would preclude you from being able to do that. But what do you do with it once you get the results? That would be the next question.
Could you if you did have the money, could you get an attorney and fight it?
Well, if it were to have caused you adverse ramifications like a revocation, I would say yes. I don't know why you'd want to if it didn't cause you any adverse ramifications. Why would you want a confrontation with the supervising authorities just because they said you showed deception if there were no consequences? But if you were suffering consequences, absolutely, we would use that as a technique. If I encountered that, that would be something that we would do. We'd say, gee, we don't trust your guy. We want our own examination. We want our own interpretation of those results. Absolutely, that would be good.
Okay.
Someone in chat named Peter said, no poly should not affect pacemaker. Increases low heart rate, doesn't decrease high unless abnormal rate arrhythmia. So I'm trying to see if we can't get this person unmuted just to get clarification on it. I still got to think that your heart rate would go up with the stress of the polygraph. Peter, can I unmute you or no? And I'm waiting on a response. What else do you have, Daphne? Anything else that people submitted?
Who creates the questions? Are they standard for all people or are they customized for the person? I think we might have hit on that earlier.
I think that's a great question.
It really is.
I bet you they're probably pretty standardized with then through a few that are going to be specifically targeted towards you.
That is correct. The examiner creates the questions, but it's with the corporation and the team and the probation officer and the treatment provider. So that, remember, they've conferred about you individually in their staff meetings and what concerns they share about you. So the team is going to figure out what they need to figure out with the polygraph examination, and they're going to construct questions to delve into your compliance. But there's such a similarity in the terms of supervision for people that are in this condition. There's just so much. They're almost identical. That's the problem the supervising authorities have. They do not know how to individually tailor supervision for an individual. So they just pile all these conditions on everybody. But so there's going to be a lot of similarity. They're going to be wondering about, like Deputy said, about have you looked at any porn? They're going to want to know about curfew violations. They're going to want to know about minors. They're going to want to know about have you been well, relationships is a big thing. Undisclosed relationships. Theoretically, you could get into a relationship with someone for the sole purpose of having access to minors. So you're 45 years old and you find yourself a significant other that's of similar age. So far, so good. But then that person has a 15-year-old, which is your choice of victims. So they're going to be looking for undisclosed relationships. Those are the type of things they're going to be looking for in a polygraph test.
I would be willing to bet, Larry, we have roughly half of the people here are on telephones. And do you want to be brave and try and see if any of them want to ask questions? And honestly, even if you want to and you're on a phone, I have no idea how to identify if you are one of the ones that want to ask a question. Do you want to take any live questions from people?
I'm always down for live questions. Now, we have a certain soundtrack we're going to play depending on the question, but we'll reserve playing that until the need arises.
I think I know what that one is. Let's see here. I don't know that I have anything else in my notes that seems like I want to cover it specifically. Is there anything else, Daphne, before we open the floodgates and let people ask questions?
I just have one more. So if you could give advice to anybody who is getting prepared to take a polygraph, what would that advice be? Like, how could they prepare? What should they look for? What should they not say, do?
I bet you the first answer up front is don't do anything wrong. Don't violate any of your conditions of supervision. And therefore you will not be in a position that you are lying. But then if you have done something, then don't ever admit it.
That-
That's me, the non-lawyer, no legal background. That's me saying that. Andy is telling you that. Don't ever tell him you did it.
You're going to want to prepare for the polygraph test by being cooperative, and you're going to want to be involved in the pretest examination in terms of formulating these questions. If you just accept those questions, and you should accept them if they're okay questions. But if someone asks you, for example, if your choice of victims is minors, and they ask you, have you had any sexual activity since becoming age 18? We can't really look at when you were a minor yourself, but since becoming 18, have you had any sexual rendezvous with anyone below 18? Then that's a good place to say, well, now let's just sharpen down that question a little bit. The age of consent is whatever it is in your state. So the age of consent is 16. So I would prefer that the question be, have I knowingly had any unlawful sex? Because I haven't. But have I had sex with someone above the age of consent that wasn't over the age of 18? Probably so. And so therefore, you're not opening yourself up to any prosecution, because if you're right about the age of consent, they can't go back now. If the age of consent changes, it even has changed since you had that sex 25 years ago, they can't prosecute you now because the age of what the law was at that time is in effect. But so my best advice is to be an active participant in the pretest interview, not with defiance, not calling it a kabuki machine, and not showing bad attitude, but say, I want this test to be as accurate as possible and to try to formulate good relevant questions. And I think that'll improve your odds of not showing deception on the kabuki machine.
Brenda says that if you want to raise your hand, if you're on just one of those old telephones, press *9. I do not know if it will work, but we will learn here live on the program. Will, do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to ask it for you? Quickly. So his question is question about sexual history. Sorry. Will, I'll come back to you because you haven't written me a question yet. Are most questions, this is from Michael, are most questions yes or no? I would think that a long answer would not work well. As far as I understand it, they're going to have to be a yes or no, a true or false, positive, negative kind of question.
That is correct. They will be yes or no questions.
What I would recommend is, this is one of those things where it's almost like a meditative process, where if you can you would need to settle your mind, and you need to control yourself and be as much in control of your responses, your breathing, and all that. The machine's going to make you nervous. But I'm with you on not endorsing the book. And if you go in there and you haven't done anything wrong, then you're not lying. And if the machine shows something, whatever, then you just stick by your guns. I didn't do anything. F you and your garbage machine.
I don't know.
That's where I would go.
I don't know that I would do the FU part, but
Will asked a question. He said, with regard to sexual history tests, what do people need to understand with regards to disclosing information regarding previously undisclosed child victims and mandatory reporting laws? Is there any danger in identifying victims generically? If they want to know the victim was a family member, when the abuse started, it stopped, etc. I think that's a neat question. So my understanding, Larry, is that if you say maybe you did something way back in the day, but you don't remember the names or locations or dates, like there's nothing there to investigate.
That would be the case, generally speaking. But the slightest information can be developed into additional information. If people look at the Von Behring case in Colorado, which dealt with polygraphs, the court there in the 10th Circuit got that, and they understood that it can open the door and a pathway to an investigation, and the statute of limitations is continuously being lengthened or eliminated altogether. So there's great danger in these disclosures. The PFR lobby is going to have to get busy passing legislation that if you're going to require these things, that people have to be immunized. if they're going to make these disclosures, that they cannot be prosecuted for undetected criminal behavior. So far, I don't know of any states that are providing that immunity. So therefore, the risk is extreme if you disclose criminality. I can't say that strong enough, that if you admit that you've engaged in criminal behavior, you may be in a state like Maryland, which is generally pure as the wind-driven snow on some things, but on statute of limitations, they don't have any statute of limitations for felony offenses, as I understand it, coming from the former chief public defender. So therefore, you would have no protection in Maryland if you disclosed that you had done something years and years and years ago.
And Larry, can you repeat the case that was out of Colorado? Von Barron, is that right?
Yeah, that was U.S. versus Von Barron.
Can you spell the last name? Because I know it's spelled weird.
VON.
I hope you can.
BEHREN.
Okay. We'll make sure that also gets in the show notes for people to look up. Remember, press star 9 if you want to raise your hand, and if not, you only have, I don't know, we won't stick around here for terribly long waiting for someone to raise their hand and just breathe at each other. Do you have any other points of things that you'd like to get off your chest, Larry?
I think I've covered it. I just caution people about being cooperative. Certainly be cooperative, be respectful, and be engaged, particularly in the pre-test interview. And the pre-test interview is not the place to make confessions, but it's the place to clarify the relevant questions. If you have any concern that's going to cause you, that relevant question is going to cause problems for you, that's the time to try to rephrase the question.
Larry, could you give an example of that?
Well, I had done that earlier with like the grazing in the store. So you would phrase the question about taking something of value from the company. We're concerned about things of value, but we know that you've been grazing. So the relevant question would be, other than what we discussed in the pre-test interview, have you taken anything of value from the company? And so you've already disclosed the grazing. You've said, yes, I've eaten burgers, I've eaten pizza slices, I've consumed beverages. And then the kabuki machine, assuming that's the extent of your taking things of value, because those things have value. But other than that, that is the qualifier that makes that question supposedly neutral, because you've already disclosed that. So you're not going to show deception because you haven't taken anything of value that you haven't disclosed. So you would do that like I said in the statute of limitations with another example. You would try to make sure that they're focusing on your activity. If they ask you if you ever had sex with anyone below the age of 18, that's a good place to say, well, probably so, but the statute of limitations is 16 in our state. So shouldn't we change that question to say, have I ever had sex with anyone below the age of 16, or whatever the age of consent is in your state? And they should not go ballistic over that, because that's legitimate. You're narrowing down your adverse reaction because you know that when you were 20 in college that you had sex with a 17-year-old, and that would make her a minor. You know that. So the machine is going to pick up on your nervousness or whatever the reactions are it's measuring. If you say, no, I haven't, when you did have sex with a 17-year-old when you were in college. But if you said, well, no, I actually think I have, but that was lawful sex at the time. So let's phrase the question, have I had any unlawful sex? And then you've modified that so it should be less problematic for you.
I just feel like as a typical person, I don't know if I'd be able to point out a bad question.
Therein lies the problem. You're not allowed to take your attorney.
Yeah, you're definitely behind the ball, right?
You're not going to know this stuff. You're not going to take your attorney in with you. They're going to go ballistic if you try that, although people have discussed it. And you're going to go into this not knowing these things, and you're going to have the machine showing that you reacted. But that's my advice, is to be fully engaged on the formulation of the relevant questions.
There are no questions bubbling up there from any of the participants. You have just a few more minutes or a few more seconds, maybe. If you do want to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand, and that would be pressing *9 if you're on one of the old telephones, or if you hover over your name or something like that, you can raise your hand. I forget how that actually works. Something along those lines, but you could ask it in chat too. And Elena says, my son is in federal and hasn't been sentenced yet, but he does have TS. He took 3 polygraphs. He passed 1, but 2 were inconclusive. The polygrapher wrote that they believed he was telling the truth, but that because of his tics, they couldn't pass him. We would like to get recommendations on how to handle this issue. Would it help to include this in his pre-sentencing information?
I don't believe I would have enough information there. What I'm guessing is happening since he's pretrial, his defense attorney is trying to do a psychosexual eval, and what they're trying to do is present a person who presents very low risk. So they're trying to put forth a compelling sentencing memorandum on behalf of him about how he doesn't have any undisclosed, undetected victims. And that's what I'm guessing they're trying to do, but I'm not sure I have enough information to really be helpful.
Okay. Anything else, Daphne, before we close this all down?
I just had one thing that I think was missed on here. For examiners, are there any qualifications? Are they licensed or certified? And how often do you have to get requalified or certified?
The last part I don't know about, but the first part there is, I want to say it's the APA, which is ridiculous because that's how you annotate stuff when you're in college. But it's the American Polygrapher Association or so we have an organization that represents the Kabuki people. And yeah, they are like a certified polygrapher from the APA. And I know I've said it's a garbage machine before, and I'll say it again. It's complete garbage. But yeah, they're certified by that institution. And they stand by this as if it's like, this is the gospel. We're like, this machine works. We should be using this everywhere.
Yeah, I'm not aware of what the qualifications are to be an examiner, but I would assume it varies from all the states, as everything does in this country. We have 50 separate jurisdictions that make their own rules, so I don't know what to say about that. But the Polygraphers Association has some kind of standards, supposedly, I've heard about, but I don't know the nuances of what they are.
Last chance for questions, folks. Anything else? Anybody? *9 if you want to ask a question. Nothing. Going once. Going twice.
Gone.
Daphne, you are awesome. Thank you for putting all of this together. I do want to point out that we got 2 new patrons this week.
Awesome.
And one of them is Daphne. So Daphne, thank you very much for becoming a patron. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys, and I love listening to you. And I'm glad that I finally figured out how to do it, because let me tell you, I have been trying since I first started listening to you guys, and I couldn't figure out, I think you need to spell Patreon, because I was trying everything. Patron, Patreon. I was trying everything, and I couldn't figure out how to get you. So
I find that interesting. There's a link on the website that will take you there, but I
never went to the website.
So
right, that would be the next part of that.
So well, and to Daphne's credit, she came in at an annual amount of $1,400. So who's going to match that?
Yes, that is right. She sent in stimulus check money. So thank you very much, Daphne. But for real, Larry, holy frickin' moly, we had a person named Russ came in at an incredibly generous level, and that puts us at 98, Larry. We are right there on the cusp of when we reach 100. For those of you that don't listen and have never heard before, when we hit 100 patrons, a former musician, I'm going to play a sax solo as whatever reward for the patrons that get us over to 100. And so we're almost there, Larry.
We are very, very close. And we did get a couple more subscribers to the podcast. I don't remember names. I've got old timers, but I do know that we picked up some more subscriptions.
Excellent. Then that's for the snail mail side. So again, for those of you that don't know, we also then take the transcript of this and we send it into prisons for a pretty competitive rate, I suppose you could say. So they get all this information inside the walls, and that is a pretty stellar thing that Larry has going on over there. Anything else, Larry? Before we shut it all down?
Nope, but I would like to. How do they support the podcast, and how do they contact us?
Yeah, I was just about to go there. Find all the show notes over at registrymatters.co, not com, just a co, registrymatters.co. If you want to call in and leave voicemail for the program, you can dial 747-227-4477. Email registrymatterscast@gmail.com. And of course, the best way to support the podcast is patreon.com/registrymatters. And that's Patreon. Patreon.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Daphne. It was really fun. And maybe we can do it again in a little while.
All right. Look forward to it.
Awesome.
Thank you so much,
great night.
guys.
Nice meeting.
Good night. Bye.
Nice meeting you, Daphne.
You too. Be nice to me next time.
I'll give
Wow.
that consideration.
You've been listening to FYP.